So, first of all, that was just a remarkable thing to experience. Starting with Ambassador Mayor, Alex and Dinu and Ambassador Mayor and I pulled off really the impossible in 2008. That youth summit for NATO was really remarkable. So that was just a great moment. Minister Orebescu Luminita, thank you so much for your kind words. It was such an honor to work with you. I was so delighted to see Daniel David in Cluj yesterday, where I also saw the air base. We also experienced this remarkable new resort, the Isa Resort. Ate much too much food, drank much too much wine, but really came to know what hospitality really means. Incredible collection of leaders of Cluj for a dinner on Saturday night. Minister Pascu, I love debating with you. The role you played in your country's history is not well enough recognized, and it's been just remarkable. Your entry into NATO, your entry into the European Union was not a given. It took leadership, so thank you for that. Alex, because he's just so incredibly modest, failed to tell you that he's also going to be the leader of the Atlantic Council's first regional office in Romania, and this will be, you're actually getting all the news first. It will be released a couple of hours from now as news, but so Alex, thank you for your kindness. One of my most memorable times with Alex was going to Yankee Stadium with Dinu. And I told Dinu that he really had to dress not like an incredibly rich Romanian, but I was going to take him on the subway, and so he had to dress down. And so he greeted us on a park bench in front of the Plaza Hotel, wearing a Yankees cap, a Yankees outfit, and I mean, any of you who know Dinu, that was not his natural attire. And then when we went to the ballpark, he took out a drafting book because, he was an architect as well. And he was drawing the entire stadium, and Alex and I didn't have any idea why that was the case. And finally I said, Dean, what are you doing? He says, well, I think he had a rugby team. Anyway, he had some sort of ballpark or stadium here, and he saw that every inch of Yankee Stadium was monetized in one way or another. So where can I put the advertising when I come back? But it was just it was a really rich relationship, and it was one full of integrity, full of trust, full of honesty. And then Alex, I hope you'll carry the message back to your brother. But he means a lot to the Atlantic Council. He means a lot to me personally. And that dinner for President Iohannis really was a dinner for Romania. It was you were there. It was really quite remarkable. So thank you for all those kind words. And let me give my first, and once you hear it, maybe my last lecture at the SNSPA. The rector told me to do this in Romanian. I wrote one version in Latin, but I think I'll deliver it in English. So, Your Excellency, Rector Remus Procopia, distinguished members of the faculty, esteemed students, guests, and friends, and as Alex put it, thank you for the A team of the Atlantic Council for being here: Denise, Julie, Daphne, Bjorn, Alex, and Dan. They are the best people at what they do in the world. It's a deep and personal honor to stand before you today and accept this Doctor Honoris Causa degree from SNSPA. You are one of Romania's and Europe's most respected institutions of higher learning, and a vital contributor to the intellectual, democratic, and transatlantic life of this country. So let me begin with a heartfelt thanks to Rector Procopia, a dear friend and a remarkable leader. Through our work together on Black Sea security and transatlantic affairs, I've come to admire your vision, your pragmatism, your profound understanding of Romania's strategic role in the world. To be honored by an institution you lead makes this moment all the more meaningful to me. This recognition touches me on several levels. First, because it comes from Romania. You've heard how close I've been to this country for many years. I've witnessed its transformation over decades. I've witnessed its democratic journey, which I deeply respect. I first visited in the final years of the Ceausescu regime. I remember walking the streets of Bucharest. I've never forgotten the whispered words, the cautious glances, the minder that every journalist has to make sure that I didn't get into trouble, or more to the point that people I talked to didn't say the wrong things to me. The fear of being overheard, the absence of light, the fear of speaking the truth. Romania had a reputation in the United States for independence because it was willing to distance itself from Moscow on some key issues. But nowhere except perhaps Albania were the instruments for repression so far reaching. And then I watched Romania rise. I saw it break free. I saw it find its voice, forge a new path. Grounded in democratic values, committed to open society, and resolutely anchored in the European and transatlantic family. From those gray days to today's difficult but promising chapter, a proud EU member, a vital NATO ally, one of America's greatest allies anywhere in the world, a leader in its region, Romania's journey is nothing short of remarkable. I know that isn't always the mood in your country. Democracies are often that way, they're messy. Not that any of you have noticed that can also be the case in the United States. But this is a period of challenge, but also one of limitless opportunity for those who want it. So perhaps that is my most important message to the students of SNSPA. Choose optimism. Choose optimism. Not because you aren't intelligent enough to know the obstacles to a better future. I played basketball in Germany for a time, and the players on my team at the Stammtisch would always say, "Why are you Americans so superficially optimistic?" And I would say to them, "Why are you Germans so superficially pessimistic?" Choose optimism. Pessimists can never create better human relationships, better companies, better governments, better countries, better regions, or a better world. Optimists may not always succeed, but they will be happier in the conviction that they can make a difference, and they will make the effort to create a better world. The American author Helen Keller, who lost her sight and hearing before age 2, said, and I quote, "Optimism is the faith that leads to achievement. Nothing can be done without hope." Nothing can be done without hope. It was no accident that Romania escaped repression and communism and the fear of self-expression. It was done because of those who had the optimism that led to achievement and the hope that produced change. Second, this honor is special because it coincides with a moment of deep personal and professional significance this week. A little bit later today, the Atlantic Council is opening its first Southeastern Europe office right here in Bucharest. At the same time, we are launching the Romanian language edition, a new edition of my book, which the rector has been so generous to lead for you. Berlin, 1961, Kennedy, Khrushchev, and the most dangerous place on earth. A book about how crises shape leaders, and how leaders in turn shape the world. It is a story of how the US and Europe navigated an existential crisis in 1961 over Berlin. And it's appropriate that it is being published as Europe navigates another existential crisis over Ukraine in 2025. George Mayor, my dear friend George Mayor, asked me to name the most dangerous place on earth today. It's Ukraine. And like Berlin, the reason it's the most dangerous place is not only because it could set off a much larger war, but because if we lose it, it will change all of history of Europe and maybe even the world in a negative direction. And that's why we're all in defending Ukraine's sovereignty, independence, and democracy. So let me say just a couple of words about that book and why I think the story has fresh urgency today. Berlin 1961 was born out of the conviction that history is not a dusty archive. And I think the great academics, the great historians know that. It's a living force. It tells the story of one of the most dangerous periods in modern European history, when Berlin became the epicenter of a Cold War showdown. It captures a moment when the world's fate hung in the balance, and when missteps or misjudgments could have plunged humanity into Soviet authoritarian oppression or nuclear catastrophe. That was what was at stake in Berlin. The book revolves around three central themes. First, that the Cold War was, in my view, a third world war, not fought on traditional battlefields, but in proxy wars, ideological contests, and nuclear brinkmanship. The Berlin crisis was one of the most perilous chapters. Its outcome, in the end, would end the Soviet Empire, the Soviet Union itself, and Soviet communist ideology. But it was done without a shock. Its reverberations were as far-reaching, in my view, as the outcomes of the first two world wars, and we're still experiencing them in Russian revanchism, in the rise of China, which became a strong country, but it didn't develop in the ways we thought it might after becoming economically strong. Second theme, history turns on character. The protagonists of Berlin 1961, Kennedy, Khrushchev, Adenauer, and Ulbricht, were men with flaws, ambitions, and insecurities. Kennedy was the 43-year-old son of privilege, unready for presidential challenges. Khrushchev was the 67-year-old son of peasants, illiterate until his 20s, whose political survival depended on him solving a hemorrhage of East German refugees through Berlin. So very often, the domestic politics of authoritarians drives them as much as ambition for the expansion of their power. Third, John F. Kennedy's first year in office may have been the worst first year of any American presidency in history. The failed invasion of Cuba at the Bay of Pigs in April, a humiliating summit with Khrushchev in Vienna 6 weeks after the Bay of Pigs invasion, and that signaled to Khrushchev Kennedy's weakness. In the book that you have before you, I spent 2 full chapters on that Vienna summit because it was so important, and I found so many new documents, enlightening, newly declassified documents, really underscoring what took place there. And then the Soviet decision to close the open wound in Berlin by constructing the Berlin Wall in August, and then a confrontation of tanks at Checkpoint Charlie, where the US backed off from its Berlin rights rather than risk confrontation, the first and last time that Soviet and US tanks would be arrayed against each other. These blunders, in my view, and the documents support me in this, created an impression of American weakness that helped pave the way for the Cuban Missile Crisis the following year. Peace through strength is not just a motto, it is history's lesson. Khrushchev tested Kennedy because he thought he was weak. He thought he wouldn't respond to the placement of nuclear missiles in Cuba. The price could have been nuclear war. And yet, and this is crucial, Kennedy learned from the failures of his first year. He finally responded in October 1962 to Khrushchev's test in Cuba. And then we got locked into patterns of behavior that would last for 3 more decades until the Berlin Wall would collapse. We'll never know whether a more resolute Kennedy in August of 1961 could have prevented the wall and perhaps accelerated the collapse of the Soviet bloc, or whether by doing so he might have endangered us all. But we know the impact, 3 decades of East European captive nations and repression behind the physical manifestation of what totalitarian countries can create when free people fail to resist. Wasn't it wonderful that we had a physical manifestation of repression, a wall? How cynical, a wall to lock your own people in. That, the falling of the wall was symbolic as much as it was a geopolitical earthquake. We're now living through our own Berlin 1961 moment. Once again, Europe stands at an existential time. Once again, an authoritarian power seeks to redraw borders through force. Putin's brutal war on Ukraine is not simply a regional conflict. It is an assault on the very principles that have underpinned Europe's peace and prosperity since 1945. Sovereignty, human dignity, rule of law. And once again, leadership matters. Strategic clarity matters. Unity among allies matters. Then it was Kennedy and Khrushchev, now it is Trump and Putin. But Europe plays an enormous role itself this time. Certainly Romania is playing a larger role this time than in Berlin 1961. And Europe plays a much larger role than Ulbricht and Adenauer did at the time. If Berlin was the symbolic front line of freedom in 1961, then Ukraine holds that position today. So George Mayor, I answered it in my text even before you asked the question. The question before us, as it was then, is whether our democracies can summon the same sense of mission and solidarity that helped win the Cold War. Can we again make history bend in the right direction? If Berlin had been lost, Romania and most of Central and Eastern Europe, Poland, the Czech Republic, Czechoslovakia, then the Czech Republic, Slovakia, the Baltics and others, would never have become free, in my view. If Ukraine is lost, others will inevitably lose their freedom as well, and not just in Europe. The Chinese are watching what's happening in Ukraine. The Taiwanese are watching what's happening in Ukraine. So in this endeavor, Romania is not a passive participant, it is a crucial actor. That's why the Atlantic Council of Romania is opening, to be an actor in partnership with you, It's the only way we can succeed in what we do here in Bucharest. Romania is a frontline democracy, not only strategically, but also geographically. You have taken in tens of thousands of Ukrainian refugees. You've supported energy diversification and infrastructure that enhances Europe's resilience. You've stood firm within NATO and the EU, and with your Black Sea position, your historical perspective, and your clear-eyed commitment to transatlantic values, you're helping define the future of this region and Europe itself, even with all your recent self-doubts and electoral upheavals. That's the price of democracy. This is not just your moment, it's your responsibility. Knowing my Romanian friends, I know you will meet it with courage and clarity. The recent Hague Summit, which I attended, underscored 2 matters that weren't so clear even a month before the summit. European countries have finally risen to take on the financial responsibility for defending themselves. Late, but welcome. And the United States, in the final documents of the Hague Summit, recommitted itself to Article 5 and to its European security commitment. Neither one of those things was entirely a given, even a couple of months ago. It's a great outcome, but then the question is, how do we execute on both sides? How does the U.S. continue to keep the American people behind this really quite burdensome security commitment? And how does Europe deliver on the commitments it's made in The Hague? At the Atlantic Council, we believe strongly in Romania's role as a convener and leader in Southeastern Europe. That is why we're planting deeper roots here. That is why we're expanding our programming. And that is why we are so proud to walk this journey with you as partners and as friends. So, ladies and gentlemen, dear Rector Procopia, dear students and faculty of SNSPA, dear A-Team of the Atlantic Council, I'm so deeply honored by this recognition. I see it as a call to continued service, a call to build bridges between the United States and Romania, a call to strengthen the transatlantic alliance, a call to defend the values that have united us for so many years, that are sometimes in doubt, but never worth surrendering. We live in times of great uncertainty, but also times of great possibility. History won't judge us by our opinions or our intention, but by our resolve and by our actions. Not by our opinions or intention, but by our resolve and actions. I'm optimistic about the future because I choose to be. It's not because I'm certain about it, but because I believe through our optimism we can shape better outcomes together. So in that spirit, and with deepest gratitude, I thank you, Ken, for this honor. Mulțumesc foarte mult. Thank you.
Thank you.